My name is Pete Behrens, and what I'd like to do is share a few stories with you, personal stories of how I came to have some improved leadership here. There we go. As well as some stories of some leaders that I've been coaching over the years and how they've come to incorporate some improved leadership and how that's helped their organizations become more agile. And I've packaged these in 6 mistakes that I've seen over and over again in leaders in the way they've been approaching their work. And I'm hoping these will illustrate to you some things to be thinking about and looking at. With regard to my English, I am from the US, and I appreciate your patience in listening to me in English because this would not sound very good in German. So I apologize. But I heard last night at the open space that for some of you Germans, listening to me in English might be easier than listening to a Swiss German. So I won't tell who that was from. He might get into trouble. But first I want to share a story. Who here is a parent of children? We have a few. Oh, look at that. Lots of parents. Well, as we know, children will be children. And oftentimes children can be problematic, and it will typically happen when we're in the car. And this is a picture of my boys a few years ago when we were driving in the car. And what happens when boys are in the back of the car is typically something bad occurs. And this time it's my younger son, Matt, who starts to cry, Dad, Josh hit me. I'm thinking, okay, ignore them. It will go away. Parent lesson number 1, ignore your children. That didn't work. Dad, it hurts. So I'm thinking, well, I could do what my father did and get stern and yell, pull over the car and teach them a lesson. But I thought about my coaching and I said, well, maybe I could ask him, what do you want to do about it? Thought that was creative. He stopped, and so I thought, okay, good. Maybe he just needed to think about it and kept driving. And then it came back, Dad, he's bothering me. So I asked him again. I said, what would you like to do about it? I want to hit him. Oh. That surprised me. And I thought, well, my wife's not with me, so why not? So I said, sure, go ahead. And it got quiet back there for a little while, and so I thought, well, maybe that's all he needed is permission, and nothing would happen. And all of a sudden, whack. Dad, why did you let him hit me? Now it's the older son, Josh. That's not fair. So I thought, well, this is working really well. So I thought, well, what would you like to do about it? Keep driving. Of course, he comes back right away. I want to hit him. Like, well, sure, why not? So they started to fight, and sooner, a little bit later, they came to me and said, Dad, why did you make us fight? And I realized at that point that kids are going to be kids. Employees are going to be employees. They're not always going to behave the way we want them to. But it's often less about them than it is about us and how do we show up. And I see often the very first mistake that leaders make is an over-focus on other people and thinking that our job is to control other people and to tell other people what to do, whether it's our children or whether it's our employees. And one of the things that I found is that, in fact, organizations and our children reflect us in our leadership. And one of the most stressful relationships in the organization is the relationship between the manager and the employee. In fact, the studies show that 70% of people say the most stress in their work life comes from their manager. Not such a good stat. So unless leaders are willing to share and work on themselves and how they come to this, employees and organizations are not going to be able to be healed. They're not going to be able to be better. Just as if we don't work on ourselves as parents, our children likely might grow up to be somewhat dysfunctional. Now, I use that example of my children to illustrate that became a really good teaching moment, just fighting help. Now, they may still get into fights today, but they've learned a critical lesson. Let me share a little bit about Lars. Lars is one of the leaders that I work with in a global research organization. And for generations, we've changed what we focused research on. And we focus today on robotics and software and things around digitization of hardware elements and trying to do what's called Internet of Things. And they're researching all of those new technologies. But you know what? What they haven't changed is how they do research. And that surprised both Lars and me as we started to look at this concept of agility and what does it mean to be agile. They're quite agile in the work they do, but they're not agile on themselves. And so Lars said, well, why don't we try some things? Let's experiment a little bit here, and let's try some experiments. And so what Lars did is Lars and I talked a little bit about parenting. And one of the challenges Lars had was he had lots of reports. And in this organization, they started reducing management layers. And so he ended up getting more and more people that reported to him. And he started to be frustrated by all of the time this was taking. It's like having more and more children at home, right? It takes more and more of our time. And so he said, well, at home, we parent together. Why don't we try some shared leadership constructs? And so Lars experimented with what's called paired leadership. And it was interesting because as he was promoting somebody in the organization to be his pair, HR, Human Resources, called and said, Lars, who do these people report to? Because we need somebody in the system to put who they report to, and we can't put both of you. And so Lars said back, he said, well, who do your children report to, you or your spouse? And I think they got the point. There isn't could you imagine if your spouse reported to you what that would look like at home? Probably wouldn't work out very well for both of you. So shared leadership works. It works in the home. Why doesn't it work in the organization? And one of the fascinating things with Lars was he found that as he got promoted, now one of the interesting things is his pair wasn't promoted with him. That was an interesting concept. But it allowed his pair to not miss a beat and continue and be a leader in that organization. Now, another challenge he found was that creating these plans for all of his people and figuring out the staffing between who works on what projects. And in research, it changes every month, every quarter, and it's constantly changing. And he said this is something that leaders have done over and over again as they put together the plans for their people, and the people are looking for that. And again, we took illustrations from home, and we said, well, at home, how do kids do chores? Do you tell them which chore to do? At our home, we developed a system where we allowed the kids to choose their own chores. What if we allowed our employees to choose their own work, their own projects? And so he created something called me staffing, where people could themselves choose the projects they worked on and with a certain amount of... Hello, good morning. Guten Morgen. And so with that, he created this concept where employees could staff themselves onto projects with a few of these rules around who belongs where and how we need on these projects these skills. And he ran other programs. It might be coming from that one there. He ran some other programs around what's called flash swarming. Some of the projects required all sorts of skills. He couldn't figure out how to put people on them. And so what he created was a concept of, let's pull everybody together for a day or two, and we're going to flash swarm on a problem. So what we find with Lars is as he's able to explore and work on himself, he's impacting the organization in many ways that are improving the organization's retention, improving the organization's budgets, meaning they're actually getting more work now in their research organization because of some of the creativity and some of the innovation and some of the work that's happening with their clients. So the results were immediate. right? So here we have mistake number one. We often as leaders focus on others, when in fact we should be focusing first on ourselves. And when we focus on ourselves, we develop ourselves, the organization comes along with it. Right? So let me go back to a personal story. My wife is with me on this trip, Jana. We've been married for 26 years now, and thanks to a number of patience, I think, on her part. And as you can see with this picture, she wasn't always this is actually us a number of years ago. She wasn't always a compliant spouse. I'm not one that necessarily listens all that well, or I used to not listen all that well. I love to talk, obviously. And one time she came to me and she said, "Pete, stop solving my problems." You may have had this conversation at home too. I said, "Wait a second, you just brought me a problem. We talk about it. My job is to fix problems. I am what's called the expert. I'm an expert at work. I was a software developer. I got promoted to development manager. I know how to fix problems. That's my job. So if you're going to bring me a problem, what else would be of value to do if I don't fix your problem?" She says, "Well, just listen." I said, "How will that help?" You see, what I was struggling with is the mistake number 2, lack of awareness. Recognize now as mistake number 1, it's a lack of focus. Now it's a lack of awareness on my own part. I didn't know that there was another way to lead. I thought all leadership was being the expert, solving problems, fixing things. That was my mindset. That's what I was good at. That's why I was promoted. And many leaders find themselves, whether you're a salesperson, get promoted to sales manager, whether you are a technical person, get promoted to a technical manager, or whether you are marketing lead and promoted to the marketing manager, we are good at something and assume then you could be good at managing people of that something, which doesn't always work. In this case, I took my expertise all the way to my relationship and said, "Wife, I can fix you too." No, it doesn't work that way. 80% of managers believe they are supportive. I believed I was supportive with Jana, when in fact, if you ask your employees, they don't agree. Right? If you ask your employees don't agree. And in this case, my wife didn't agree. Now, are your employees telling you this? Likely not. Your employees are likely not sharing this information with you. So, it's awareness that is the key here. It's not the skills. An over-focus on skills won't help the situation. Being a better listener necessarily won't help me if I don't know to listen. Being a better communicator won't know if I don't know when to communicate and how to communicate effectively. So, let me tell you a story about Rachel. Now, Rachel is a leader, a portfolio manager inside of a financial organization. And she leads other business analysts running lots of projects. And so she is a fairly senior member of her staff. And she's been promoted through the organization. And one of the things that I found interesting was she felt, strongly about this concept of servant leadership, which I thought, hey, that's a good thing. Servant leadership we teach. Her boss was telling her, "You're not strong enough." Her employees were telling her, "You never tell us what to do." And she was confused by this. And she thought, well, I'm supposed to be a supportive, nurturing, caring leader. That's my style, and that's what's gotten to me be effective. If I'm going to tell people what to do, that is counter, isn't it? So she did a 360 to find out more information. And one of the things we found out through this awareness exercise was her power balance. Now, if you think about a power balance, there's this side that is over on this side, which is the assertive side, and that's Pete. That's me, right? I'm the assertive leader. But then we have Rachel, and Rachel is on this side over here, what we call over-accommodative. And what I mean by that is Rachel will often ask many questions, but never contribute ideas of her own, because she's afraid that's telling people what to do. When in fact, when we know leadership is actually a balance. One of the things we worked on is we worked on some of this awareness, and we said, okay, let's talk about some of your default behaviors. What do you typically do? And she said, well, typically I will go into a room and maybe sit on the side or sit in the back. Or I'll go into a meeting and I'll just sit down and I'll wait for others to talk. And so we explored, we said, what if you just changed where you sit? And she experimented on that. And she experimented sitting in the middle of the table, experimented sitting towards the front of a room, experimented sometimes standing up in a room. And what she told me later in another session is she said, Pete, it's amazing. By moving myself in a different part of the room, I didn't have to change any of my thinking. It just naturally I acted differently. I started to talk more, or I started to get engaged more, I started to get collaborative more, and I started to find a more assertive self. Even it was always there, I just didn't feel comfortable necessarily in bringing that out. And so one of the things we work on with leaders is this construct that it's a choice. But awareness has to be there first. And so what we do is we say, all right, I need to be aware that there actually is a choice, that there actually is a default mode. And once I have choice, I can see that there are multiple paths. That's what leads to change. So we think about this concept of awareness precedes choice. Choice precedes change. So if leaders want to change, it's not just a matter of developing new skills. It's not just a matter of learning to listen better. We need to take a further step back and say, wait a second, I need to even be aware of what I'm doing before I can begin that journey. So, jumped one slide too far. So we've got two mistakes. Number one, I often focus on others when I should be focused on myself. Number two, I often focus on my expertise and skills when I should be focused on the awareness of when to apply those skills. So let's look at number three. We live in a rat race. Change is speeding up. It's going faster and faster, right? We're focused on delivering every quarter. You're likely under a lot of pressure from your management to get it out the door, release the product, get the service going. Whatever it might be you're doing, you're getting a lot of pressure to deliver. Grace, similar boat. As a senior project portfolio lead in her organization, she's responsible for delivering solutions. And she did it, and she was using a Scrum, a feedback-based approach that many of you are aware of because you're here at an Agile conference. And she thought she was doing the right thing. She's getting feedback from some key stakeholders, showing them what's going on, staying aligned with those key stakeholders until the end of the project. And she said, let's show everybody what we're doing. We've done some great work. And you know what happened? As soon as she showed it to the rest of the world, they said, what? That's not what we thought you were building. That doesn't work here. And they got all these problems. And you know what? She had a 2-month slip in her program. So what Grace found was she found that she got stuck in this trap, that her job was to develop a great product. Her job was to release a product and get it out the door, but that wasn't her job. When in fact, her job should be to have happy stakeholders. It's not enough just to mission control a product or a service out the door. We need to make sure that product aligns with stakeholder needs. And if we're not doing that, we're going to be like Grace and be misaligned. This is what we call an Agile co-creation. We have to do it together. We have to do it collaboratively. And so now what Grace does, Grace creates opportunities for stakeholders to get engaged. It's not just a presentation. It's not just a slide deck to say, hey, here's our new version. What she does are collaborative sessions where the users actually sit every couple of weeks at the computers and use it and give her real, raw feedback, and the team is watching this. So she's learned that what's more important than delivering software is experimenting and learning what software we should be delivering. And if you're focused on the delivery and you're not thinking about, hey, are we building the right thing? Likely you're going to be making the same mistakes Grace has made. Okay. We are Swiss Germans, so therefore we want to stay on time. Are we doing well on time? We're about halfway through our show. How are we doing? Germans don't talk much. Okay. Number 4. I don't know if you've heard this concept or if you go to the gym very often. In the United States, my wife and I belong to gyms, and we belonged to gyms over the years, and we go work out and try to stay healthy, right? It doesn't always work, but for the most part we do. And we noticed a pattern that in January the gym gets really busy. But then in February, everybody goes home again. And we call these people January people. And these people are the people that come to the gym but aren't able to stick with their New Year's resolutions, to follow through on their goals. And in fact, surveys have shown that over 70% of individuals that create goals do not follow through with those behavior change goals. Why is this the case? It's hard to change behavior. And so what we're finding is that the mistake here is an over-focus on what I do rather than how to structure. And so let me tell you a little story about Sati. Sati is a senior vice president or managing director at an IT global consulting firm, right, based in New York. And Sati ran into a problem back in 2008, and there was a global financial crisis that hit pretty much most countries. And including consulting firms, they had to cut costs because a lot of their contracts got dropped. And so he had to figure out how to cut costs. The second problem that Sati had was their product quality was not up to par. So you've got a double problem now. Cut costs, improve quality. How am I going to do that? Right? That became the challenge. I could certainly try to take a behavioral approach and just try to get people to work harder, buckle down. You're going to work weekends, you're going to work nights, you're going to solve bugs. And I've seen that before. We call that the death march in the United States. I don't know if you've been on a release death march. Those don't work so well. What Sati decided to do was experiment with the organization itself. He looked at his organization and said, we have all these support costs in IT support, and mostly based in India. And we have all this IT application architecture development going on in the United States. And let's look at if we can actually break this barrier down, and let's work together to solve this problem. So what they did is they created something called Support 2.0, which was a reinvention of support. And what they did was, what Sati helped create was a hyper-collaborative, co-located team in India and New York that every day root cause analysis every issue that came through. This is thousands of issues every day that they were working on. This was going to be a 3-month experiment. It turned into a 4-year program that ended up cutting costs by 75% and improving quality and stakeholder expectations, stakeholder satisfaction. They had fun doing it. Support individuals were no longer left high and dry trying to say, sorry, I can't help you, there's a problem in the system, call back. And architecture was now aware of the issues because they're working hand in hand with support. And they were able to cut costs on both regards. Now, they took this success, and the early part of this success, they took and they said, wait a second, if breaking down barriers between support and IT architecture works, what about breaking down other barriers? And they know they had all these teams, and those teams were working in a Scrum-based approach, right? And we're working in Scrum teams that are cross-functional, like we say, I have business analysts and I have developers and testers. But their teams were fairly big. Those teams were like 8 or 9 or 10 people on a Scrum team. And if you've learned Scrum, that's often too big for a Scrum team. And the reason is we had all these unique specialties that had to work together. And so what we said was, what if we got rid of every title in the organization? And so Sati said, we no longer have business analysts, we no longer have developers and testers, we have team members. When we form teams, we're going to build skills together, and you as a team are going to solve the problem for our customers. And you know what? They found that they could have teams of half the size, 4, 5 people, that were as or more productive than their bigger teams. They had tremendous results in terms of reducing costs, tremendous results in terms of increasing quality and customer satisfaction. and went on to actually develop an IT service that they provide now to their clients. So we took something that was good inside their organization and have made it something that they can sell. This is what we call behaviors or culture follows structure. If you want to change behavior, change the structure of the system in which people behave. So that's mistake number 4. We focus on the structure of the organization, not just how people behave. Okay. Now, let me go back to a personal story. One of the things I was pretty good at was telling people what to do. And oftentimes that meant that my job was to get the team to perform. And so what I would often do is facilitate meetings to make sure that they were effective and we're planning effectively, right? And this is like a picture of me. It's not exactly me, but this was one of the pictures of my clients that I took. And the leader is up front on his computer thinking that he is being a very facilitative manager, when in fact his people are like very engaged. And what do leaders look for? Leaders say, hey, let's go do Agile, let's go do that project, let's go get that done. And often leaders are going to ask you, hey, is your team productive? You might ask, what do you mean by that? And they'll say, well, are you producing enough things? You're saying you want more. Well, is it okay if we produce more, but it costs more? No, it has to be cheaper, right? It has to be cheaper and faster. So now you're saying, I need to produce more, I need to produce it faster, I need to produce it cheaper. And this is often the focus of many leaders. They're focused on the performance of your organization, how you're doing. And you know what? Study after study, even the best books. These books, by the way, Tom Peters and Jim Collins, are the #1 business books in MBA programs today. You look at the results of the businesses they have as case studies in their books, only 30% stuck with the performance that they had at the beginning. What this is saying is performance does not equal resiliency. Resiliency means stick to it. They don't stick. It doesn't stay. It doesn't sustain. This happens again and again and again. In fact, McKinsey did a study of this around thousands of organizations that says companies that focus on performance actually underperform companies focused on performance plus health. So what is health? So if we go back to here and say, well, if your manager's saying, I want more, faster, cheaper, you might ask your manager, is it okay if we don't have quality products? No. We still have to increase the quality of our products. Okay, I get it. You want more, faster, cheaper, and better. Is it okay if we don't produce what the customer wants? No. We got to produce what the customer wants, so we need customer satisfaction. Okay, I get it. You want more, faster, cheaper, better, and what the customer wants. Is it okay if we burn out our employees doing it? Will that cost us more? Probably. This is what we call organizational health or resiliency. Companies that focus on the health of the organizations outperform companies that just focus on short-term performance. Let me share a story of Salesforce. This is a story that's been told many times publicly, and that's why I'm using their name here, at conferences and in books. Steve Denning and Mike Cohn have talked about Salesforce. Salesforce was a client I worked with about 11 years ago. When Salesforce was growing very rapidly in the early 2000s, they focused on being the best company out there. And you know what happened? They crashed. In 2006, they were unable to deliver a single product. I loved your slide wherever you went. Who did the morning opening? He said, big means problems. That's what happened. They grew, boom, everything fell apart. What worked as small didn't work as big. That's the one slide I could read, by the way. Yes. That's fine. What Salesforce did is they changed to a health view. And they said, let's be the best at Agile, which will enable us to be the best at being the best customer relationship management company in the world. And what did that look like? What Salesforce did is they took their competitive spirit, and what was happening inside Salesforce was individuals were competing, and individuals were fighting for jobs. And they said, let's create competitive teams. Let's put them on a showcase. And they had teams that came to the showcase, would tell their stories. And they would fight to be better than other teams. And this was at Salesforce doing some really interesting things in terms of prioritization, focus, and commitment. And what they found was employee satisfaction skyrocketed. It was fun to be part of a team. Have you ever been part of a sports team? That can be fun, can it? Even if you're competing and fighting, it's fun. And that's what Salesforce found to be one of the secrets to their sauce, was focusing on internal health, not external delivery. And that's what has grown Salesforce. They have outpaced the market 800 to 1 in market share and stock market growth, etc. So, the mistake number 5 is an over-focus on performance, when in fact, as a leader, you should be focused on the health of the organization, which leads to performance. One last story. At Salesforce, it wasn't all pretty. When they started with Scrum, they went all in. And it was the first time in 2006 that this has really happened. They had about 350 people, so not Deutsche Bank size, 4,000, right? So they had 350 people in their research and development group. And they said, everybody's going to go do Scrum now. Just go do it. And then they called Pete, and they said, hey, Pete, we need your help. We got all these teams doing Scrum. Help us. And I'm like, whoa. Right? So they were all running to Mike Cohn's class and getting, Scrum Master and Product Owner trained and things like that. And I was brought in to help with some of the coaching inside the organization. And that was going pretty well in the first couple of months. And they said, Pete, we need help with one of our special teams. It's what we call the platform team. And if you know Salesforce, they have something called force.com, which is their engine. Think of this as being the thing everything else rides on, right? If you build an application on Salesforce, you're going to use force.com. This is the heart of Salesforce. And so I went to Salesforce. I went to this force.com meeting, and we probably had a big conference table that probably had 20 big level senior architects around the table. And I said, okay, how can I help you? Silence. Like, I heard that you guys were interested in starting to do some Agile. I'm here to help you with that. And one person raised their hand and said, we never asked for you to help. I thought, oh boy. And then I started to whiteboard a few things. I said, well, we could talk about tracer bullets, and I'm an architect. I've been a developer in the past. I brought up my expertise, and I started to share some things about maybe some things we could try. And he said, Pete, you don't understand our system. It's too complicated for that. We're not going to break things down into 1 month increments. This is hard work. You don't understand. And I was like a dog with its tail between its legs, leaving that meeting. And I thought, this is one of those moments in an organization where if this team doesn't adopt Agile practices and principles, the rest of the team is going to say, well, why are we doing it if they're not doing it? Right? And this whole organization I thought was going to be on the edge of working or not working, and my job's on the edge of working or not working with this organization. But the one thing we had is we had that rhythm, the showcase. And the one thing leaders said was, which I supported wholeheartedly, whether or not you're doing Agile, you come to the showcase. Now, think of the showcase like a Roman Colosseum where people come in and fight the bull. And or whatever it might be, the matador. And so the architect, the platform team came on the first showcase. And they showed their documents, they showed this is the stuff we're going to work on. And leaders are like, that's not what we're doing here. You need to show real work that's done. And so I applauded leadership. I thought, good. I was a little bit nervous that they would buckle under, and so at least the message was said. So I thought, okay, they're going to come talk to me now. So I waited and waited and waited. They never called. I thought, uh-oh, So I did what I could do as a coach. I worked with other parts of the company, and I worked with other teams that wanted help, and it was going really well. But in the back of my head, I'm thinking, and I'm actually starting to hear, why aren't they doing it? This is just a fad. This is going to pass. We're not, Agile's not going to stick around because it doesn't work for them. So I came to the second showcase, a bit nervous this time. And I'm in the audience of the showcase because the teams are the ones presenting. The teams are doing a demonstration, and this is the end of a sprint review for them. And the architecture team gets up. And the architecture team starts to present, and somebody says, boo. They actually booed. And I was really nervous. I'm like, what's going to happen here? And how are they going to take this? And other teams were getting applauses, by the way. So you're seeing kind of this Colosseum effect where teams are being praised, not with money, but with just what feels good. Am I succeeding or losing in this Colosseum? And I thought, well, now surely they're going to call me. And yet again, I was wrong. No call. So now I'm getting more nervous, and I'm working with some of the other teams, and some of the other teams are doing really well, but I'm having other teams start to question, is this actually going to be done across the whole organization? Is it going to work? And so I come to the third showcase, and we're getting close to ship points. And now I'm really nervous for my job, because I feel like if I'm failing here, that this is going to not work at Salesforce. And so the architecture team comes up to do their demonstration. And they just blew me away. They started to break small pieces off and work on them. They started to demonstrate and show real progress. They started to increment in ways that I just had no idea. Because they didn't get it from, where did they get it? How did they learn to do this without me as a coach? And one of the things I learned there, and by the way, they got the standing ovation, that showcase. One of the things I learned there was oftentimes we think about the destination and the goal, when in fact it's the journey that's the more important element here, right? It's the journey. And if you think about agility, agility is a lot like personal fitness. If you think about personal fitness and all you think about is, I'm going to be the strongest, I'm going to be the fastest, do you get to be the strongest or the fastest? No. What happens is when you focus on the destination and you forget the fact that it takes hard work, it takes pain and toil, it takes practice to become healthy, agile, to become fit. And one of the things I realized at Salesforce, one of the biggest sticking points, why it worked at Salesforce, they had to go through the pain of what it was like to be agile in order to find the success of being agile. And I don't think if I had given it to them, I don't think if I had just helped them do it, they would have the same ownership of their agility that they do today, because they went through that pain and struggle. And I learned as a coach, it's less about how I am focused about agile and more about, hey, are we working together on this journey? So just as your Swiss German trains, this train comes in on time. All of these leaders are not, or I should say, none of these leaders are the CEO. None of these leaders are the senior of their organization. Many of these leaders are in middle management. But you know what? Each leader found a way to create an agile bubble, to experiment on themselves and their organization in ways to focus on structures to enable agility to be effective. And this is what I find to be the focal point in my teaching, what I've been spending so much time with recently, which is what we call certified agile leadership. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to be the master agile leader after a bit of awareness. The goal is, aha, I see there's a path. I see there's a journey for leaders, not just a journey for organizations to become agile. And there are a number of workshops that I'm doing. One in Zurich, actually, next Monday and Tuesday, or Tuesday, Wednesday, I apologize. Tuesday, Wednesday in Zurich. but also some other cities that will be around. If you want to talk to me, I'll be here throughout the day to talk in English and to share some additional stories with you. So thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Who's got a question?
Hi, Pete. Regarding the story of this guy who co-located his support and development teams, if you are in a difficult situation, the company is a difficult situation, how can you dare to do such a bold experiment which smells being more costly than the work you currently do or the way you do it?
Yeah, good question. Thank you for that. What I find is the dire the circumstance, the more opportunity we have to explore new opportunities. One of the things that I follow is a change transition expert called William Bridges, named William Bridges. And he talks about when the order of change magnitude is great, the gray zone of uncertainty is great. And the opportunities for experimentation is also great. And so what leaders can use is use disruption. And good leaders, great leaders, use disruption as the opportunity for change. Just as I use the kid disruption as an opportunity to teach about fighting, you can use disruption in your market, disruption in a buyout, disruption in a product didn't release, disruption in this case in the financial market, as that opportunity, because there is no expectations that you will succeed. So there's more opportunity for risk.
Any other questions? Thanks. So, right. Thank you, Pete. Thanks very much for this inspiring and entertaining talk. We've got a little present for you. Wooden cutting board in remembrance of your visit to the Lake Konstanz.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I will just make one additional point, if I can. And some people ask me, and I'll throw a kind of a question to myself. If leaders make mistakes, do organizations also make mistakes? And to kind of pull these together, to combine these together, one of the things I see as a mistake most organizations make due to their leadership is by trying to just get others to do Scrum or Agile. And what happens in these organizations is that we're focused on behaviors, we're focused on delivery, and we're focused on others, not on structures, not on us as leaders, not on experimentation. And all sorts of problems ensue, which I won't go into. But to reverse that, to say, hey, if I focus on our values and leadership, and I focus on our structures and build agile structures, that's how we find organizations to be healthy. So you can combine all these mistakes, and it makes what we call super mistakes. Or combine all of the opposites and create highly sustaining, growing organizations. So, thank you.